Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by Onyx_Ox. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property, and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain, and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards. Back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence, beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting first grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone or when I was out of sight was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard, yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another. Especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I is at school still, so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcomed friend on/around our property was one night in 2014, when I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. Note: the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck, and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset. To keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens. Along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens but the smell of rotting flesh even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was for some reason. When we still lived at that house and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house. Of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down. And this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing. Or maybe there was no supernatural explanation. But it still lingers in the back of my mind. Second story. This story was shared by you/WeirdBryceGuy. My younger sister is going through a very disturbing phase. My sister has gone through several phases. There was the emo/scene phase of her early teens, an emotionally tumultuous time during which our house was filled with court music, and she was rarely seen without a wrist full of bands. Her hair, when it was not dyed jet black, was staked with red, or occasionally blue, and sometimes even green. My parents tolerated it. I endured it, being 2 years older than her, though in my mind, immeasurably older, and tried to combat the harsh, often shrieked vocals of her music with the surprisingly preferable noise of video game simulated gunfire. Her moods changed more often than she changed clothes, but, fortunately, the phase was short-lived. Post-high school, she entered her veganism phase, being virtually indoctrinated into it by friends she'd made during her freshman year in college. You'd think this would be better, with her thousands of miles away, only visiting for the major holidays. But no, It was much worse than the phase that preceded it, exactly because of the distance. She'd made considerable effort to inform us, through calls, texts, emails, and mailed pamphlets, of the cruelty with which farmed animals are handled, and while my parents and I agreed that the conditions for these creatures were often harsh, we politely though firmly told her we'd still continue with our carnivorous lifestyles. She of course equated us to several genocidists throughout her human history, and caused several scenes at Thanksgiving and Christmas, both holidays of course having various meats served. Eventually, she mellowed out, an ideological dampening my parents attributed to the inevitable diminishing of the phase, but which I suspected was the result of a guy who most likely ate meat, and either argued with or simply ignored her impassioned vegan policing. Her attempts to proselytize were reduced to recommending documentaries every few weeks. For weeks after the noted change in her campaigning, she abandoned the attempts to quiz us on the documentaries we half-heartedly watched at her request. By the end of her freshman year, she'd pretty much reverted back to her default state, amicable, non-confrontational, normal. I figured there'd be another phase, things always happen in threes, right, and waited for some dramatic pronouncement in which she declared to have finally seen some previously obfuscated truth. But she remained normal throughout her break, during which she stayed at home in her old room. I had yet to move out. I'd had the same job for the last several years and they'd given me a managerial position when I'd graduated high school. She finally showed us pictures of her new friend, and I of course flaunted the confirmation of my suspicions to my parents behind my sister's back. When she went back for the spring semester, things seemed like they'd continue on being normal. I began to doubt my aforementioned belief in the occurrence of threes. Hope sprang up in my heart for a sister who'd finally develop her own sincerely held passions and express them like a sane-minded human being. When February rolled around, and my sister called home on a Monday night, unusual, given her schedule, my hope was completely, terribly effaced. I was sitting in the living room watching a show when my mother's phone rang. She came into the living room from the kitchen where she'd been cooking, and picked up her phone from the coffee table. She answered, greeted my sister with the appropriate surprise, given the time of day, and then said, "All right, all right, all right," in quick succession. She turned to me, a look of confusion on her face, and passed me the phone. "She wants to talk to you." "Needs to." I took the phone and put it to my ear, and before I could even greet her my sister shouted my name. I winced away, then asked her to lower her voice. She apologized, and I heard her breathing come out in stuttered rasps as she waited for me to respond. I nearly asked why she hadn't just called me on my phone, but then remembered that I had left it upstairs to charge. "Did you get my texts? Did you get them out of the house? I can't talk for long, he's inside paying for gas right now. He'll be back any second." Despite my request from only seconds ago, she hadn't lowered the volume of her voice, had just spoken in a tone that was less of a shout, and more of a panicked hiss. The words came out in almost a single stream, barely intelligible. I asked what she was talking about, and she let out a noise that was a bizarre mix of a moan and the beginning of a laugh, a noise that was unmistakably the result of a mind teetering on the edge of sanity. "The texts. I sent you so many texts." My sister's voice was so loud that my mom whipped around on her way back to the kitchen, having heard her daughter's voice blare through the phone. The call wasn't being fed through the speaker, the voice had just been that loud. My mom's face quickly changed from a look of confusion to an expression of motherly worry, and her eyes questioned me about her daughter's apparently manic state. I shrugged, then held up a hand for her to wait while I questioned my still screaming sister. It took several tries to silence her before she finally let up, and I quickly asked a series of questions before she could get back to screaming. I told her that my phone had been upstairs charging, and asked what the texts had been about. I also asked if she were alright, and if she'd please stop screaming so I could have a proper conversation with her. She listened to all this quietly, although her breathing was still labored, either due to the exhaustion of having nearly blown out the phone's speakers, or the result of some anxiety whose source she had yet to share with me. I expected some long outpouring of emotion, perhaps related to the guy I'd suspected had come into her life and dismissed her militant vegan persona. But instead, in a voice that was barely above a whisper and yet packed more tones of emotion than her screams, she said, "If you don't know, then it's too late. There's no fight left in me now." She then hung up the phone. I sat on the couch, rendered speechless by the gravity that had been intoned in those parting words. My mom approached and asked what my sister had said, but I only extended the phone to her. She took it, put it in her pocket, and sat beside me on the couch. I stared ahead, my gaze resting on the TV but not really seeing it. My sister's words, though vague, had carried an indescribable suggestion of bleakness, of ill-fated mortality. My mom put a hand on my shoulder, and again asked what my sister had said, this time making no attempt at disguising her worry. My expression had frightened her, the dire import of my sister's words imparted through my dumbstruck face. I repeated what my sister said, though I couldn't begin to convey the way she had said it. Still, this caused my mom a great deal of worry, and she pulled out her phone. As her shaking hands flew over the unlocked screen, she called out to my father, who'd been upstairs working in his study. He descended just as my mom put the phone to her ears. She didn't have to tell me what she'd heard, the automated speech was audible enough with her sitting right beside me. "I'm sorry, the call cannot be completed as dialed. Please try again." My mom stared dumbly at the phone as tears began to swell in the corners of her eyes. I was similarly affected, though tears hadn't yet risen in mine. In any other situation, the message might have made sense, considering the trembling that had come to my mother's hands at the onset of her worry. But I'd watch her place the call. She hadn't dialed, she'd gone to her contact list and selected my sister's name, something she'd done a million times if once. My sister's phone, for whatever reason, had been disconnected following my strange conversation with her. My dad looked from my mom to me, an expression of amusement on his face. My mom, now on the verge of total mental collapse, retried her attempt to contact my sister, and her expression of dread told me of its futility. She threw the phone onto the table, then practically ran to my father, who held her in an embrace while mouthing, "What the hell is going on?" Before I could open my mouth, my mom pulled her face away from my dad's now tear-stained t-shirt, and wailed out, "Something's wrong with our daughter." My father's eyes shot to me, his eyebrows raised in a manner that asked a question I immediately understood. He wondered if my sister was undergoing yet another phase, one that might somehow be worse than the vegan one. I shrugged, and he returned his attention to my mom. As he stroked her hair, unsure of how to calm her, he turned to me and said, offhandedly, "Oh, your phone was going off quite a bit earlier. Were they expecting you at work today?" My phone. My sister had said that she tried contacting me several times. Without answering him, leaving him to console my mother despite having no knowledge of the issue, I sprinted upstairs to my room. When I returned downstairs, phone in hand, my parents were sitting on the couch. My dad's phone was to his ear, but before I had fully entered the living room, he was shaking his head. He hadn't been able to get in touch with my sister either. They looked to me, eyes full of both worry and hope that the messages contained information that would explain my sister's strange behavior and the sudden disconnection of her phone line. I unlocked my phone, and was surprised to find only 4 text messages and missed call with an accompanying voicemail. Given the circumstances, I expected to see a greater number of attempts to reach me. I opened the text messages, with the first having been sent shortly after I'd put my phone on my wireless charging pad in my room. The next one followed a few minutes after the first, the third about an hour after that, and the final text only 2 minutes after the third. I read through them all 3 times, then put my phone on the coffee table before the couch so my mom and dad could read them. My mom's trembling hand reached out, but froze mid-grab. She was petrified by the frightful uncertainty of what they might contain. My dad, a bit more accustomed to familial issues than her, he'd lost a brother growing up, grabbed the phone and read through the texts. Ordinarily well composed, his face soon shifted into an expression of distress that elicited a startled cry in my mother, who finally seized the phone and read the messages herself. A few moments later she dropped the phone and began wailing insensibly, a fit of unprecedented hysterics that neither my dad's embrace nor his soothing words could calm. These are the texts. Nothing has been changed. 4:38 p.m. You were right, but you probably already know that. Mark was the reason. It started with jokes. He'd say things like, "Plants are alive, too. You're just trading one cruelty for another." He'd call me, "Terror of the Trees," or, "Broccoli Butcher." Things worsened after that, though. He'd sneak meat into my foods. Nothing major, just bits of bacon or beef or ham cubes, but still enough to where I'd taste it, and feel guilty at how good it tasted. Then he'd laugh, and do something to make me forget about it, or outright forgive him. It went on like this for weeks, until he stopped trying to make it up to me, and insisted that I suck it up, and stop whining about rightfully indulging in the meat of weaker species. Unfortunately, I did. I ate the meat, and became a vegan only in name. 4:43 p.m. We had stew the other day. Meat, potatoes, carrots, onions, it was really good. I've basically been living with him. He lives in a decently sized house off campus, in a pretty nice neighborhood. His parents are pretty rich, and bought him the house after his mandatory first year in the dorms. Ordinarily, I'd cook something and bring it over, but that day he insisted on cooking, and said that I'd be eating meat. It wasn't a question or a statement that left room for argument, but an order. I was tired of fighting, of resisting, so I went along with it, just wanting to have a nice day with him. We ate, and oh my God, the stew was amazing. I hadn't had something so deliciously savory in years. It made the relatively simple meal seem like something that had been expertly and painstakingly prepared. Mark was happy to see me enjoy it so much. But there was something off about the happiness. His expression became a bit too happy, more than just an expression of pride or relief at a guest enjoying his cooking. 5:33 p.m. You have to believe that I had no way of knowing or even suspecting the truth. How could I have? I'd never tasted it before, and even though it hadn't tasted normal compared to past experiences with meat, no one's mind would naturally make such a terrible leap. When he brought me into the basement and showed me the refrigerated section, I was understandably shocked. It's not often, if ever, you hear of someone butchering and storing their own meats. But when he opened the massive steel door, I knew at once what I'd just eaten only minutes before. The chilled carcasses hanging from hooks in that cold, misty space weren't those of animals. I recognized that immediately. I was shocked, disgusted at myself and the sight before me, and scared of Mark, because at that moment I believed that I was going to join those butchered forms. There were even a few empty hooks suspended from the ceiling, swinging eerily from some cooling draft. 5:35 p.m. I'm still afraid, but now the source of my fear is different. I'm not afraid of Mark anymore. I'm actually thankful, albeit shamefully, that he's given me this opportunity. I've been so stupid, especially during that phase of veganism. There's nothing wrong with eating meat, nutritionally or ethically. Mark has shown me that, has allowed me to experience the truth firsthand. And there's a kind meat that's so much better than all the others, a meat that once tasted becomes all you can think about. It's enamoring, almost spiritually captivating. I love it. But I'm also afraid of what it means for my life, and what I'll have to do, now. Mark's supply isn't infinite, and it isn't easy to procure this special kind of meat. Now that I've had it, now that I've seen his collection, I'm embroiled in the whole thing. I'll have to help him get more meat. I want to help him. I stood frozen in front of the coffee table while my mom sobbed into my dad's arms. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw a look of utter despair on my father's face. It was terrible, unsettling, and I would have been reduced to an emotional state similar to my mother's if I hadn't suddenly remembered that my sister had also left a voicemail. Without bothering to first listen to it myself, I played the voicemail through my phone speakers. It was much shorter than the contents of the text messages, but carried that same grave tone that my sister had spoken with in her phone call earlier. Here is a transcription of the voice message. You have to leave the house, now. Get them out. We're coming. Mark insists that in order to show my devotion to him, to the meat, the first meal we prepare together must be from a family recipe. Please, Hayden, you have to leave the house. I know I can't stop him, and I don't know if I'll be able to stop myself. I'm so hungry, hungrier than I've ever been. By the end of the message, my mom had stopped crying, shocked to utter silence, terrified beyond all sense. It took 3 shouts of my name by my father to snap me out of my own horrified state, and when I regained awareness of my surroundings, my dad was ushering my mom into the kitchen, towards the door that led into the garage. With a mind numbed by terror, I followed along automatically. We bundled into my dad's SUV, and sped out of our driveway and onto the darkly lit street. Despite seeing no one for several miles, it felt like something tirelessly hounded us, some presence, or deep desire psychically projected by a pursuer who hadn't yet picked up our trail. We've checked into an unremarkable motel about 200 miles outside of our town. My mom is completely benumbed, barely conscious of anything beyond the most basic stimuli. My dad's face is set in a perpetual expression of anxiety, and every time I close my eyes, I see Mark's face, shown to me in pictures sent by my sister months ago, but warped hideously, devilishly, into a grin of cannibalistic malice, with bloodied strips of human flesh sticking out between sharpened ivory teeth. And in these awful, mind-assaulting images, I see my sister beside him, her face similarly transformed, her grin equally murderous. A few minutes ago, my dad called our neighbors and asked if they'd seen anything unusual going on around our house. I saw the color drain from his face as he listened to what they said, and then ended the call. I met his gaze, my question sent through the look alone, too terrified to speak. He cleared his throat, and without looking at my mother, who sat on the edge of their bed, looking absent-mindedly out the window, said, Alan and Lee said they saw your sister and a man pull into the driveway, enter the garage, and then leave a few minutes later. But aside from that, nothing else. My dad put the phone on the bedside table, turned off the lamp, and gently laid my insensate mother on the bed beside him. A few moments later, when my trembling had subsided and my fear had died down to a manageable degree, I went to the motel door, ensured that it was locked, and climbed into my own bed. It was all just familiar, habitual behavior. Despite the hour, I knew that I wasn't going to get a second of sleep. I don't know what neighborhood Mark lives in, what kind of car he drives, or if Mark is even his real name. Calling the police seems pointless. I think my dad arrived at the same decision sometime earlier in the day, otherwise, I think he would have called them by now. My sister, by the guidance of some awful, possibly even inhuman cannibal, has developed a deep desire for human flesh, and is even willing, monstrously, to devour her own family. As I laid my head on my pillow, I silently prayed that I'd never see her again. Third story. This story was shared by Transportation Sad 104. The story of my fourth great-grandfather in the American Revolutionary War. My fourth great-grandfather served in the American Revolutionary War from 1777 to his discharge in 1778. He was a militia, meaning he has to defend local towns from British forces. Me and my grandfather were scavenging our stuff that we hadn't used for a while. We went to our ancestor's house in Massachusetts, my fourth great-grandfather, to drink beer and talk about friends and family. It was a nice house. There was a fireplace and a casement window. After our talk, my grandfather got up and went into a room. Returned with a small book which looked like a diary, and I was correct. My grandfather said with a calm tone, "You know, your dad doesn't like to talk about this because he thinks that you will stay up night every day. If you don't know what's this book, then it's your fourth great-grandfather's journal during the war." It was 12 a.m. right now. It scared me a little bit. My grandfather read the whole entire journal, and after that, I have no words, we just said goodbye, and went to our homes, and I couldn't get some sleep after that story my grandfather read. The following is my fourth great-grandfather journal. November 13th, 1777, I have been enlisted in the Continental Army. I was a youth when I entered into the service of the military. My elder brother hath perished in the Battle of Saratoga. My friend, William, and myself were dispatched to a hamlet in Upper State New York, a community of roughly 200 souls. November 21st, 1777, about the time of Thanksgiving, my comrade William was deployed to spend the holidays with his kin in New York City, while I dutifully stood guard over our town. At the stroke of 1 a.m., as I maintained my vigil, musket in hand, patrolling the entire township, I discerned a voice that was unmistakably that of my friend William, exclaiming, "Hey Arnold, come and behold what I have discovered." This, however, puzzled me greatly, for William had ventured to New York City with his family. An eerie intuition suggested that something was amiss, as if his voice had been twisted or distorted in some unnatural manner. Summoning my resolve, I called out, "William, where are you?" Yet, there was no reply. Then, from behind me, a response emerged, and it sent shivers down my spine. "I am right here," came the retort, and as I turned to face it, I beheld a grotesque and inhuman figure. Standing at a towering 9 feet in height, its emaciated visage appeared as if it had suffered from relentless hunger, and its form lacked the attributes of humanity, including any semblance of genitals. Swiftly, I discharged my musket, aiming squarely at its abdomen, eliciting from it a shrill cry akin to that of a fox. In an astonishing display of speed, it vanished into the night, leaving me confounded and bewildered. I would not encounter it again until the passage of a full month. As I proceeded to a nearby shop in proximity to the creature I had encountered, a scene of dreadful horror unfolded before my very eyes. There lay a deceased man, likely in the latter stages of his 50s, amidst a pool of sanguineous fluid. The sight was indeed a gruesome and ghastly spectacle to behold. Without delay, I swiftly mounted my trusty steed and embarked upon a journey to New York City, with the intent to apprise my friend William of the dire events that had befallen. November 22, 1777, I arrived in New York City and reunited with my friend William. He inquired as to the purpose of my journey alongside him, and I proceeded to recount the entirety of the unsettling events. Following my account, his countenance took on a spectral pallor, and he hastily concluded his repast. Together, we set forth, making our way back to the environs of upstate New York, with the solemn intent of launching an investigation. November 24, 1777, William and I returned to the small town as the clock struck 4 in the afternoon. The atmosphere was chill, and a serene calm enveloped the surroundings. I chanced upon a woman and inquired if she had ever laid eyes on a creature of extraordinary stature, one that reached 9 feet in height. Her response was in the negative. Thereupon, I recounted the entirety of the unsettling narrative to her, and she found herself overtaken by a sense of dread. She kindly extended an invitation for us to lodge at her dwelling for the night. Later, William and I revisited the shop, where we encountered its proprietor. I queried if he had encountered the enigmatic entity, and to my disquiet, he responded with laughter. My emotions oscillated between agitation and exasperation. Notably, the bloodstains that had once marred the floor were conspicuously absent, as if no vestige of a body had ever occupied that space. In the evening hours, I took up residence in the woman's abode. While William slumbered soundly, I gazed out into the wooded expanse through the windowpane. My ruminations remained captive to the troubling events that had transpired. Sleep eluded me, the incident persistently occupying my thoughts. It was during this nocturnal vigil that I engaged in conversation with the woman, whose countenance possessed a captivating charm, her chestnut tresses framing a visage that bespoke youthfulness in her early 20s. We exchanged introductions, and our affections bloomed. December 20, 1777, William and I journeyed to Valley Forge with the purpose of receiving military instruction under the tutelage of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer of notable repute. Under his guidance, we embarked upon rigorous training regimens encompassing the proper use of the bayonet, the precision of marching in formation, and the swift execution of orders. The toil was relentless, and I found myself beset by fatigue, akin to the weariness that befalls those toiling in the fields, such as slaves laboring under the unrelenting sun, gathering rice or tending to tobacco. To rejuvenate our spirits, we sought repose in distinct quarters, each of us retreating to our respective lodgings. Thereafter, we would reassemble for further sessions of training. December 27, 1777, sometime around 5 a.m., I awoke to the urgent voice of William, summoning me to venture outside, for he professed that my beloved had arrived at Valley Forge. Yielding to his plea, I consented, and as I cautiously unfastened the door, the world outside lay silent, the rest of our comrades in deep slumber. Surveying the surroundings, my gaze fell upon William, who stood alone in the dimness. However, conspicuously absent was my girlfriend, and a disconcerting revelation coursed through me. This was the very creature I had encountered just 1 month prior. Gripping my bayonet tightly, I inched the door shut, wary of what lurked beyond. A span of 10 anxious minutes elapsed, devoid of any sound but for a distorted and unnerving bark. I steadfastly resisted the impulse to reopen the door, all the while gripped by an escalating sense of dread and fear. January 8, 1778, William confided in me about a disquieting incident that occurred during the night, some 12 days hence. As he lay in slumber, the creature materialized outside his window, although on this occasion, it refrained from assuming the guise of a beast. In an attempt to dispel the dread that had settled upon him, William feigned slumber, striving to convince himself that the encounter had been naught but a disturbing dream. The disconcerting nature of the occurrence left both of us in a state of profound trepidation. We find ourselves confronted with a vexing dilemma: should we elevate this matter to the High Command for their counsel and intervention? January 20, 1778, William and I conveyed the disconcerting news to General John, who expressed a commitment to conduct a thorough investigation in the town we had staunchly defended in upstate New York. Laden with provisions of sustenance and potable water, we made our way to the settlement, only to find it draped in an eerie stillness. As night descended, William, General John, and myself embarked on a collective patrol of the desolate town. We had intended to rendezvous with the store owner, who had previously scorned my account, but he had inexplicably vanished without a trace. Encountering the woman with whom I had shared my time, her visage now etched with deep anxiety, she inquired about my whereabouts during my absence. I apprised her of my sojourn in Valley Forge. She confided that the store owner's inexplicable disappearance had left her with grave reservations, and she harbored doubts as to whether the same malevolent entity that had claimed the life of the elderly man 2 months prior was responsible. Remarkably, she bore the news of her pregnancy. Recognizing the need to offer solace and security in such uncertain times, I extended an invitation for her to accompany us to Valley Forge, where she might find respite and refuge. Without hesitation, we ushered her to the sanctuary of Valley Forge, a haven where she could seek rest and reassurance. January 23, 1778, upon our return, the conspicuous absence of General John confounded us. He was nowhere to be discerned. Inquiries amongst the inhabitants yielded a disconcerting account, for they recounted observing him engaged in discourse with an unseen interlocutor amidst the woodlands, his steps leading him deeper into the shrouded forest. We embarked on a steadfast journey through the woodland, our voices raised in a clarion call for General John. Along this course, we happened upon a cave, its interior steeped in inky darkness. Kindling our lanterns, we pierced the gloom with their luminance. There, within the cavern's recesses, a chilling tableau unfurled before our very eyes. Scores of human remains lay strewn about, reduced to naught but skeletal vestiges. Amongst the macabre assemblage, a bloodied handprint, etched with the ominous proclamation, "Arnold and William are next," leapt out to assail our senses. A portentous conviction overcame us, and William voiced it with urgency. "We must evacuate this dread-filled abyss," he declared. Swiftly mounting our steeds, we departed from the site of the dire discovery, retracing our path until we were safely ensconced within the confines of Valley Forge. January 25, 1778, upon our return, we conveyed the harrowing chronicle to George Washington, the laughter upon his countenance serving as an unwelcome reception. He chided us, deeming our belief in the realm of the supernatural or apparitions to be a folly of the highest order. A wave of indignation surged within us, for our assertion rang true, yet his credulity was beyond our grasp. It was then that we learned of his intent to enact our discharge, the designated date set for March 15, 1778. As the sands of time dwindled within the hourglass of our service, we found ourselves endowed with an abundance of leisure. 2 a.m. January 26, 1778, we chanced upon an entity that bore the semblance of a deer, yet as its gaze fell upon us, the creature affixed its eyes upon ours, an unsettling communion that endured for an indeterminate span. In an abrupt and astonishing metamorphosis, the creature swelled in stature, launching an onslaught upon our steeds. By some providential grace, our horses withstood the assault, emerging from the fray with their lives and limbs intact. Yet, the enigmatic entity persevered, doggedly tailing our every step. We find ourselves in close proximity to the border of New York, to say the least. January 29, 1778, we tarried in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, seeking reprieve for a solitary night's rest. To the townsfolk, we divulged the fullness of our tale. Amongst them, a man by the name of Joseph, seasoned by service in the French and Indian War, emerged as a source of wisdom on matters of lore and legend. Joseph beckoned me into his cabin, nestled amidst the sylvan outskirts of Williamsport. Here, in the quietude of his abode, he arranged a parley betwixt myself and the Native Americans, whom he identified as Ojibwe Indians. Remarkably, Joseph possessed the gift of translating my words into their tongue, and their responses into English. It was amid these exchanges that they imparted to me the name of the malevolent entity we had encountered, a Wendigo, by their reckoning. The Indians conveyed that the slaying of a Wendigo availed two methods, a well-aimed shot to the heart, or the infliction of death through fire. William and I, burdened by the capriciousness of our marksmanship, elected the latter course of action, consigning the creature to the cleansing embrace of flames. February 15, 1778 to February 16, 1778, I returned to Valley Forge and imparted to my beloved the course of action I had charted. Her countenance radiated with enthusiasm, bidding me farewell with a heartfelt good luck. On the ensuing day, William and I labored to fashion torches, a strategy to confront the elusive entity should we encounter it anew. As fate would have it, our paths once more converged with Joseph. He pledged to dispatch a cadre of Native Americans to accompany our mission, their purpose to aid in the relentless pursuit of the Wendigos. And this, dear friend, brings me to the most cherished segment of our narrative. March 1, 1778. Sometime around the 7th hour of morn, I was stirred from slumber by a familiar symphony of barks, hearkening back to those eerie echoes of 4 months prior. With stealthy resolve, I roused the Native Americans, Joseph, and William from their repose. Swiftly, we readied ourselves, seizing hold of our trusty torches, resolute in our intent. In relentless pursuit, we embarked upon the chase, hot on the trail of the elusive Wendigo. As the creature materialized before our eyes, we hurled our flaming implements in unison, igniting a chorus of anguished cries that reverberated through the air, threatening to rupture the very confines of my eardrums. Then, in a surreal tableau, I bore witness to the gradual dissolution of the Wendigo's corporeal form, vanquished by the searing blaze. Profound gratitude welled within me, a sentiment I readily extended to Joseph and the Native Americans for their invaluable tutelage in the art of the Wendigo's demise. March 10, 1778. Subsequent to the departure of the Native Americans, accompanied by Joseph, William and I made our way to the township in upstate New York. Venturing into the wooded expanse, the very locale where General John's presence had last been witnessed, I espied a recently excavated depression in the earth. Drawing nearer, our grim discovery unveiled itself. The lifeless form of General John lay supine within the pit. The spectacle that met our gaze was one of unimaginable horror, a testament to the inhuman brutality inflicted upon him by the Wendigo prior to our triumph over the loathsome creature. March 15, 1778. We received our honorable discharges and were dispatched to our respective homes. I journeyed back to the heart of Massachusetts, where I sought to unburden my soul by recounting the harrowing chronicles of my service to my family. Meanwhile, it grieves me to relate that William's sojourn in the urban labyrinth of New York City had taken a grievous toll upon his sanity. He was committed to a wretched institution for the infirm of mind, a place where tales of mistreatment at the hands of the attending physicians weighed heavily upon my conscience. The plight of my dear friend weighed heavily upon my heart, and I harbored a profound sense of sorrow on his behalf. In the year 1786, I undertook a poignant visitation, an opportunity to commune with William for the final occasion. It was a melancholic farewell, for in the year 1788, he departed this realm, his tormented spirit released from the bonds of earthly suffering. For those who may peruse these words, I commit them to paper on this day, the 4th of October, in the year 1822. A span of 44 years has elapsed since the nightmarish ordeal befell me. The specter of those dire events still haunts my thoughts, a disquieting presence that time has failed to diminish. I must extend my profound gratitude to Joseph and the Native Americans whose valor led to the demise of the creature. Yet, even as I draw solace from their triumph, I cannot fully quell the apprehension that one day, the malevolent entity may rise once more from the abyss. Alas, I am compelled to acknowledge that my days are numbered, for infirmity has taken hold, and my journey upon this mortal coil nears its conclusion. The prospect of bearing witness to any potential resurrection of the fiend is beyond my grasp, as I stand on the precipice of my own impending demise. Furthermore, in August of the year 1778, my son entered this world, a joyous arrival that transpired shortly after the calamitous incident we had weathered. Regrettably, the fates conspired to keep us apart for countless decades, a prolonged separation that weighed heavily upon my heart. As time unfurled its tapestry, I received tidings that my son had embarked upon his own journey, entering into the sacred bonds of matrimony and siring offspring. His valor was tested in the crucible of the War of 1812, a conflict that further etched the indelible mark of service upon our family legacy. Yet, in the year 1814, the specter of sorrow descended upon me once more, as my cherished wife departed this earthly realm. Her absence leaves an irreplaceable void, and in the present moment, as I inscribe these lines, my eyes are awash with tears, for the ache of her absence lingers evermore. Add there you go, this has been in my memory for 30 years. My grandfather is at the ripe old age of 102. I still think about how brave my fourth great-grandfather and his comrade killing the Wendigo. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Valor_Angel. Stay out of Mammoth Cave National Park. Let me start this by saying this is based off an encounter with this specific cryptid I heard growing up. This did happen in Mammoth Cave National Park. If you believe in cryptids, that is, I'll leave that for you all, yo decide. Names and dates have been changed to protect the identity of the individual along with the ending. They are happy and healthy to this very day. I hope you all enjoy. Stay out of Mammoth Cave National Park. By Trevor Murray. I have always loved the woods. Ever since I was a small child I have found more comfort in them than anywhere else. It wasn't until my adult life that this changed. It all started on a normal camping trip during a cold November weekend. Most people would have canceled the trip due to it recently raining, and with a high of 37 all weekend long. However, I enjoyed the extra challenge. The trip was to Mammoth Cave National Park in south-central Kentucky. For those of you who aren't in the know, Mammoth Cave is the largest cave system in the world, with a beautiful national park full of amazing trails and places to go canoeing and all your other favorite outdoor activities. That is, of course, on a surface level. Many locals know not to go on the north side of the park at night alone or even in a small group. Quite a few people have gone missing over the years, and very seldom is it on the south side of the park. The park is split down the middle by the Green River, which stretches across the park from east to west, connecting Nolan Lake and Green River Lake, both of which being popular spots during the summer for camping. Everyone's uncle had seen Bigfoot in these woods. Heck, I'm sure that they also shared a sandwich a time or two. I've never believed in the paranormal. I think it can all be explained away by logic and reasoning. Saw a ghost? Yeah, right, that's just your brain imagining it. Did that light turn off on its own? Sure, might want to call the electrician to fix the crappy job the first electrician did while the house was being built. In saying that, I will admit that I do enjoy a good story, especially creepy ones found across the internet, especially those of the local urban legend across Kentucky of the Goat Man or the Barilla. For those who don't know what the Barilla is, it is a local legend in south-central Kentucky about an animal frequently seen at Native American burial grounds and local cemeteries at the edge of small towns. It's described as having short black/gray fur with a massive waist and even larger arms. It didn't get the name Barilla for nothing. Its head is being described as that of a large wolf with long pointy ears, amber eyes, and a short stubby snout. Some have described it more along the lines of what a stereotypical werewolf would look like. And for the Goat Man, well, we have all heard that tale before. I don't think it needs any introduction. Anyways, back to the camping trip. I was going alone this time. I thought about bringing my son along as he had just recently turned 13 and I felt more comfortable taking him on longer, harsher trips with minimal gear. He always seemed to enjoy camping, but this was out of his league. It was too cold and the trail was too harsh and unforgiving for anyone without proper experience. The trip itself was over the course of 2 days. The first was hiking up to the site, which was set up on the highest point in the park. The next was of course a slow hike back, which in all honesty would be even more dangerous due to the rapid drop in elevation combined with the cold slick mud and clay that would be found on the trail. I always made sure to pack lightly on hiking trips like this to really push myself when it came to my survival skills. On this trip I carried with me a small knife, 2 50-foot strands of 550 paracord, my tent and sleeping bag, and some iodine tablets to purify the water of any harmful bacteria found in the water, a small flashlight really only strong enough to illuminate 10 to 15 feet in front of me, and then of course a fire starter and duct tape. Overall I packed more than I normally would for such a trip. However, with the recent birth of my second child a few months ago, I started to take less risks and packed more each time. For food I brought with me a pack of beef jerky and some granola bars. That's really all I needed to feed my slim frame of 150 pounds at 5 feet 11 inches. Time came for me to leave for my trip. Getting in the truck, I felt a cold feeling wash over me. Like a sixth sense telling me not to go on this trip, but I ignored it. I had already taken off work for the 2 days I would be gone, and I'm not about to waste the few precious vacation days I got each year. The drive itself should only take 3 hours depending on the ferry still used by the park. The ferry was the quickest and easiest way to get across to the north side of the park without adding an extra 2 to 3 hours onto the drive. It was a common complaint to those who came on vacation from out of state. However, us locals usually took the chance to catch up on a new book or to double-check our gear in case we had forgotten to pack something while waiting for the ferry to reach the south side boarding dock. I was currently reading A Game of Thrones for the 3rd time. P.S. Danny is like 14, you perverts. It took the ferry only 45 minutes to get back on the south side, but when the crew stepped off they went to each of our vehicles to tell us due to the increase in wind and with the currents being strong today there would be no more rides across the water today. Anyone wanting to get across would have to go around and take a bridge across, the closest one being an hour-and-a-half drive away from the docks. This at the time had upset me. However, I understood why they couldn't risk the journey across to the other dock, and so I went on my way. It was a fairly long and boring drive. There was no use in bringing my cell phone due to there being no signal anywhere in the park. Even on the tallest peak of the park you would get no signal. Yes, I know what people are going to say, you should still bring your cell phone when going out camping, and to that I agree, but I hated the distraction of it. It always pulled my attention from nature, and I also just didn't want to deal with another piece of equipment I would need to keep track of. Remember, in my mind, the lighter the better. Originally I had planned to get to the parking lot at the beginning of the trail by 9 a.m. However, it was now noon and I only had about a good 7 hours of daylight left. This meant I wouldn't be able to make it to the camping grounds at the end of the trail by nightfall. This isn't the first time this had happened to me, however I always hated it when it did. Hiking up the steep incline even in perfect conditions at night was dangerous and heavily advised against by park rangers, so I would have to make do and set up camp at the first area I could find after sunset started and wake up early tomorrow to catch up on the 3 hours I've lost due to the ferry. The first 3 hours of the hike went perfect. I saw a timber rattlesnake. If you ever visit the eastern United States, watch out for those. Not only are they big and strong for a snake, they are also very, and I mean very, venomous. Once I had hit the 5-hour mark on my hike, I had run out of water for the second time and needed to refill my bottle, since this was the last chance you get until you make your way back down. I was going to go for another 30 minutes or so before I made camp. There is a nice clearing up ahead that if I can get to, then I will be in good shape to make up for the lost time tomorrow. While refilling my water, I noticed a paw print in the mud 7 feet off to my left on the bank. It was undoubtedly a canine print left from where what I presumed was a coyote coming to stop for some water sometime in the last 24 hours. That was until I got closer to the print and realized just how massive it was. Now I'm a smoker. I smoke around a pack a day, and well, this print was 2 packs long and slightly bigger than 1 pack wide. Let me translate that for all the non-smoking readers. Whatever made this print was massive. There's no way a coyote made this print, but there aren't any wolves in Kentucky. There's also no dog breeds I know of that have prints that big. Whatever made this was massive, and well, I had no intentions on staying here by the river and wait for its return. I hurried back onto the trail, this time with more pep in my step, so I could hurry and set up camp to offer some protection if whatever that thing that made the print was still around. I made it to the clearing and set up camp just as the sunset was starting to fade into dusk. First I quickly set my tent up and threw my sleeping bag inside, followed by starting a fire. If there was a predator out there in those woods, the fire would keep them at a distance for a while at least, so I thought. I next used my 2 strands of 550 paracord and tied them around the campsite at knee level to act as a tripwire for anyone or anything coming on to the campsite, to give myself a few more precious seconds of time to react. I finally sat down and tore into the pack of jerky I had packed. This gave me some comfort and relaxation, as now I had food in my stomach and a fire to keep me warm. Then I heard it snap. My blood went cold as my mind went a million miles an hour as to what could have made that noise. Was it a person? Could it just be some sort of animal like a deer just passing through? What if it was that creature that made the pint back down at the river? Whatever it was large and heavy, as I heard twigs snapping louder and louder as it drew closer. Who's out there? Announce yourself. No answer came. I have a gun and I will shoot if you don't announce yourself. It was a lie, however it was a bluff that had gotten a response countless times over the years, however still no answer came. Whatever was making these noises was heavy. It had to have been several 100 pounds for it to make twigs snap that loud, like they were bones being broken with each and every step. That's also when I noticed just how much distance the creature had covered in only a few seconds. Whatever it was, it couldn't be human. Its pace was too slow for the amount of ground covered, and the steps were too loud and powerful for it to be a person. Some time had passed before I heard anything else. The steps had stopped just outside of the light my fire produced. Whatever this thing was, it was smart and understood to stay out of the light where it could see me and I couldn't see it. And there we stayed for what felt like an eternity, unmoving, trying desperately to stretch the little bit of spare wood I gathered to keep the fire going as long as possible. It was waiting for the fire to die out, but I wouldn't let it. I couldn't let this thing get its chance to attack me in the dark. I knew if it really wanted me, all it would have to do is come right into camp and have me for dinner, but it never came. Some time had passed and the fire had come to its small, desperate final breaths of life when I decided to head into my tent, thinking the creature had moved on to choose another target. That's when I saw it, those awful amber eyes, cold without emotion. They struck utter fear into me. This creature was massive. It had to have been at least 8 to 9 feet tall. I couldn't see the body, it was too dark for that, but those eyes. Those cold, terrible eyes will haunt me for the rest of my days. I still see them to this day, every night laying awake and in my sleep. I quickly turned my flashlight on and saw the large, lanky frame of this beast. Its dark black fur covered up what was undoubtedly an impressive and horrifying amount of muscle for its build. That's when I realized the putrid stench that had come with it. In my fear I had not noticed the foul smell of death and rot that followed this creature. It only took the smallest moment to react and drop down to all fours and let out the lowest, most awful growl I ever heard. It could be felt in my soul. The anger and hatred this thing possessed could only be described as pure evil incarnate. I quickly hurried into my tent and hid for the gruesome end that was about to come my way, praying not to any specific deity but anyone or anything out there who could hear me. I do not want to die. I do not want to die. Please God save me. I do not want to die. I heard the creature approach right up on the tent, sniffing and growling at me. I swear I don't think my heart had beat a single time. What felt like hours had passed without a sound. Then it was gone. Its howls could be heard off into the distance, reminding me that I was lucky to not end up as its supper tonight. I did not sleep for even a second that night. How could I? I had just experienced the face of pure evil, malice itself given form into our world. I knew I should not be alive, and that the only reason I did not die that night was by its choice, and that alone. When dawn broke, I exited my tent and found evidence of the creature all over the campsite. Pieces of fur, paw prints and claw marks on nearby trees, just to name a few. This trend continued on the trail back to the car. I never made it to the end of the trail. As soon as I packed up camp, I hightailed it out of those woods. I knew if I was to encounter that creature again, I would not be so lucky next time. When I got to the car, I threw my backpack into the back seat and hurried into the front seat of the car, not saying a word. I sat there in silence with my face in my palms. When I looked up, I saw its amber eyes staring at me, looking at me with a pleased expression on its face of the terror and trauma it had just caused me. This thing. It was intelligent. It wasn't after me to kill or for sport. It was after me to make me suffer. Like human suffering was its way of feeding, the look of pleasure on its face, that grin with its long, terrible yellow teeth showing. God, why is such a creature allowed to exist in this world? What grave sin have I committed to be tortured by this thing's existence? I started the car's engine and drove off, driving well over the speed limit. Every now and then at a stop sign I would swear I saw those amber eyes, but each time when I looked again they were gone. When I got to the north side of the park's dock, I waited there patiently as the ferry slowly made its way back. When the crew finally came up to my car, they stopped and remarked how pale I looked, like I had seen a ghost. I knew they wouldn't believe my story, so I brushed it off as the cold weather taking its toll. I rode home in silence. The radio was turned off and I was left to my own thoughts racing through my mind about the creature. When I arrived home late that night, my wife had already put our daughter to sleep. My son was off at some friend's house playing Halo 3, having a good time. I sat there on the couch contemplating what had happened out there on that trip. I decided to head to bed soon after. When I had opened the door, my wife Sarah had remarked that I stunk and if I had been sprayed by a skunk. My blood ran cold. I smelled it too now, that awful putrid stench. I made sure not to make a face and dismissed her claim and went to take a shower. As I got done, I looked out the window and there it was, illuminated by the street light with that insidious grin on its face. It had followed me home and saw the fear on my face. Oh, the joy that must have given it. It's been 2 months since that camping trip. Every night it returns. Sometimes brushing up against the side of the house, other times staring through the window and others howling in the distance. It made sure I understood it wasn't going anywhere. I had done some digging online and found out the creature was the Barilla. It had other names as well, like Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road. It's been 3 more months since I found out what this creature was. I've been in contact with God knows how many experts to try and rid this thing from my existence. Each attempt became more and more desperate, and with each attempt the Dogman's pleasure grew. It knew I was desperate to rid myself of it. I cannot keep living my life this way. When you find that I will be gone by the time you find this, just know I love you and I'm sorry. I will not give this creature the pleasure it seeks so adamantly. I am sorry. I love you all, and when you read this, please sell the house and move as far away from Mammoth Cave as you can. When it learns I have killed myself, it will come for one of you next. 5th story. This story was shared by Dr. Blackjack 21. My girlfriend took me camping. I just want to start by saying that dating is hard. Once you get past all the bots, ads, and scammers and meet a real person, the guessing game begins. Why is this person actually available right now? Are they really just down on their luck, or is it something else that you're happier not knowing? Then, once you figure out their deep dark secrets, the question becomes, are they willing to put up with your deep dark secrets? This process can take weeks to sort out, usually resulting in a dead end somewhere, forcing you to start over. The whole thing is frustrating, demeaning, and humiliating enough that you're physically and emotionally exhausted, making you just want to give up and be a loner. Now I know what you're wondering. What's this got to do with anything? Well, it's kinda simple. A little bit ago, I wrote about how my girlfriend, Wendy, never eats and that I heard some unsettling things at her house the last time I visited. Well, I decided to keep seeing Wendy. Sure, she might have some unusual habits, but she makes me feel good about myself, and I'm happy with her. So what if she never eats or chases off bears while nude in the middle of the night? Compared to returning to the dating scene, that's really not so bad. We even have nicknames for each other now, Country Girl and City Boy. I'll let you guess which is which. Anyway, that's a rather long and roundabout way of saying that, yeah, I went on that camping trip with her, and things didn't go quite how I expected. First off, I wanna say that she was right. The forest really is beautiful. The sun's heat, combined with the coolness of the shade, while listening to the insects drone lazily in the background, seems to slow time to a crawl, making each breath a relaxing experience in and of itself. It's entirely unlike anything you'll experience during your morning commute. Combine all that with the right company, and soon you'll wonder why you'd ever return. And let me tell you, Wendy is 100% the right company. Wendy was quick with tips to make the hike easier, from how to properly distribute your pack load to how to lace your shoes for maximum comfort. During the trek to where we were going to set up camp, she alternated between offering interesting bits of information about the local flora and fauna and walking in silence, allowing me to get lost in the experience. The whole affair made me want to give up the city life and move to the country. There was just one thing during the walk that wasn't as pleasant as everything else. At one point, we must have walked too close to a skunk or a rotting carcass or something because the whole area around us started to reek. At first, it wasn't so bad, but eventually, it got so strong it made me want to gag. I jokingly mentioned it to Wendy, but she just looked ahead like she was determined and told me, "Pick up the pace. We'll be past it soon enough." Sure enough, we eventually got past the smell, and things quickly became pleasant again. The rest of the hike passed without incident, and Wendy even helped me set up the tent. Her evident experience in the matter showed through because it took no time. Soon enough, everything was ready, and we even had a nice, cheerful fire roaring. This time, when she pulled out the supplies for dinner, I didn't even bat an eye when it was clearly only enough for one. Whatever was going on with her, this was just the way it was going to be. It was up to me to accept that or move on, and I'd made my call. But I have to say, for someone who never seems to eat, she sure knows how to sear a steak to perfection. After a pleasant evening and an even more pleasant night, we passed out in the tent together while listening to the crickets and the more distant owls. But of course, if that's all that happened, I wouldn't be writing about it here. Sometime during the night, I awoke to find I was alone in the tent. This wasn't too unexpected because Wendy was both an outdoor enthusiast and a bit of a night owl. I debated calling out to her, but something in the air felt like I shouldn't disturb it with such an out-of-place sound. However, Mother Nature did have her demands, and it was time to answer her call. As I unzipped the tent and stepped out, I couldn't help but look up into the night sky. The stars were breathtaking. You never see this many this vibrant in the city. However, their beauty couldn't distract me for long in the face of more urgent demands. Do you know that feeling when you've been holding it in a little too long and finally experience relief? If it weren't for my experiences earlier that night, I might be tempted to claim it is better than sex, but we'll just say it was still pretty euphoric. Maybe it distracted me from the fact that all the usual night sounds had suddenly gone quiet, but it couldn't distract me from the sudden smell of rotting flesh. It was even stronger than it had been on the trail and was accompanied by the kind of fear that you usually feel when you're very young and just starting to wonder if there might be reasons sounds go bump in the night. I gagged as I struggled to cut off the stream, zip up my pants, and retreat into the tent again. Once in the tent, I reached for the flashlight, then hesitated. I desperately wanted to see better, but something in the back of my mind told me it was better to remain hidden. Of course, I don't know how well hidden a blue tent in the middle of the forest can be, but turning on a flashlight would be like activating a beacon for everything within a few miles to see. I sat in the dark for I don't know how long, feeling my heart pound through my chest loud enough that I was sure whatever was out there could hear it clearly. Thankfully, the smell eventually faded, but I was still so high on adrenaline that I knew I wouldn't sleep another wink for the rest of the night. Or so I thought. The following day, I awoke with Wendy cuddled in my arm, with one of her legs and arms draped over me, and once again, she was totally nude. Now, I was pretty sure she'd put on some pajamas before going to bed, but as she stirred and I got a good look at what was on display, I suddenly didn't care all that much. Eventually, she smiled lazily up at me and spoke. "You sleep all right, city boy? You seem to have some pretty rough dreams in the middle of the night." At the time, those words made perfect sense. In the light of day, it seemed pretty clear that whatever happened last night was probably just a vivid dream brought on by the experiences of the day before and an unfamiliar environment. After a bit more time together, we decided to get up and tackle another day in the forest. However, when I finally crawled out of the tent, I could see our entire camp was in disarray. It was like something had gone through and tossed everything around. A few of the more delicate items were totally demolished. After a moment, I called out. Hey. You might want to take a look at this. As Wendy crawled out of the tent, she made a face. Must have been a bear. They usually don't come out this way, so I wasn't too worried about them. I guess that's on me, sorry. A bear, that kind of made sense. At least, I told myself so. As we were cleaning up, I even saw tracks, though, in my inexperience as a city boy, I would have said they belonged to a dog, not a bear. A huge dog. Maybe a wolf. What was even odder was when I found what looked like hoof prints. Looking at the prints, I realized that deer must be much bigger than they look on TV since they were more than twice as long as my hand. There isn't much more to say about the day. We fixed the place up, had breakfast, went on a hike, made dinner, and called it a night, with a few other minor activities sprinkled throughout. I was back to enjoying the trip, so much so that I had mostly forgotten about the night before. But that night is when things took a bit of an unexpected turn. Once again, I awoke in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I wasn't alone this time, as Wendy was still asleep, half on top of me again. However, that stench was back and stronger than ever. It was amazing how bright it seemed in the tent. It must have been a full moon, or at least nearly full, because I could clearly see the shadow of a large deer pass between us and the night sky. But there was something wrong with this deer. It was clearly too tall, as if it was standing on hind legs, and when it opened its mouth, I could even make out a mouthful of very sharp teeth. I couldn't help it. I felt myself breathing more heavily by the second as my heart rate skyrocketed. My mind went blank when I suddenly felt Wendy stir. Remembering the presence of my considerably smaller girlfriend, I suddenly felt protective, as if I couldn't let anything happen to her. I was just about to tell her to be quiet when I noticed her looking up at me with a finger on her lips as if telling me to do the same. Then she whispered to me, "Stay in the tent," and started to get up. I don't know what I was thinking or if I was thinking. All I knew was I couldn't let Wendy go out to face whatever that was, so I reached out and grabbed her wrist before she could exit the tent. However, when she looked back at me, I released her immediately, almost as scared of her as whatever was outside the tent. Her eyes reflected light back at me like a cat's, and I could see the nails on her hand growing as I watched. In half a moment, she turned back around, opened the tent, and climbed outside. I will never forget the sound I heard at that moment. After I got home, I looked up the calls of a bunch of wild animals, and in hindsight, I'd say it was like a compilation of an elk call, a rabbit scream, and a mountain lion scream, but impossibly loud. Wendy shouted in answer, her tiny human voice sounding so frail in comparison. At least it did until it started to change, morphing and twisting into the howl of an impossibly large wolf. I couldn't help it. I peeked out the tent flap, and standing in front of the tent was what I could only describe as a werewolf. The little 5 and change Wendy was now standing at least 7 feet tall, covered in fur with claws and fangs that looked like they could tear through steel, and she looked ready for murder. Then, some movement on the opposite end of our camp drew my attention, and I witnessed a living nightmare that suddenly made a werewolf seem like less of a problem. It looked kind of like a deer if a deer had more articulated limbs far too long for its body. The feet ended in hooves, but the hands ended in long bony claws. The whole thing looked desiccated, its skin drawn so tight over its ribs and arms you could make out the skeleton beneath. The fur was spotty and looked partially rotted, with open holes leaking bodily fluids that should never see light. Its teeth were long and serrated, clearly meant for tearing rather than chewing. I sometimes hear hunters talking about deer being 8 or 10 points, but if I had to estimate, this thing had a 30-point antler, with many of the tines covered in what I suspected to be dried viscera from previous victims. The two monsters charged each other. The nightmare, which I now know was a Wendigo, lowered its head, intending to impale its opponent, but at the last second, Wendy threw herself nearly flat on the ground, only to rocket up into the Wendigo, latching onto its long neck with her powerful jaws while her hind feet kicked gouges into its vulnerable stomach. However, the Wendigo didn't seem willing to give up that easily and tossed Wendy aside. She hit the ground hard and was soon set upon by the other monster. She raised an arm to defend herself, only for the Wendigo to latch on with its own teeth, easily tearing through her skin and muscles. With a powerful kick, Wendy pushed the nightmare back, then started swiping at him over and over, making it lose ground. However, lowering its head, the Wendigo charged forward again, and this time, Wendy wasn't fast enough as the Wendigo caught her on his antlers and flipped her over his back, with new blood darkening the tips of the tines. But that was its downfall as Wendy sprung up and again latched onto its neck with her teeth, this time from behind. The nightmare struggled in vain, occasionally raking Wendy with his claws, but she refused to let go and began ripping and tearing her way through its neck until she grabbed hold of its antlers, and with one final jerk, the head came free. I don't have the heart to describe what came next, but let's just say the sound of flesh being torn and eaten is much more distinct through the thin membrane of a tent than a closed cabin window. Time passed. At least an hour, maybe 2 or 3. It's hard to say for sure. I don't know what I expected to happen next. Maybe I was going to be next, or perhaps I'd wake up from this nightmare, but eventually, the adrenaline passed, my eyes grew heavy, and I fell asleep again. When I awoke in the morning, I was alone this time. There was no sign Wendy had come back. I'd half hoped she'd still be here, telling me I'd had another nightmare, but I don't think I would have believed it again. It was kind of sad and lonely packing up our things by myself. I debated bringing Wendy's stuff with me, but I'm not that good of a hiker and wasn't confident I could pull it off, so I just left her things in her pack inside the tent. When I exited the tent, I was more than a little surprised to see Wendy sitting calmly by the fire pit with no wounds in sight. She smiled sadly. "So, I guess I owe you an explanation." I remember hesitating, my mind blank, before I settled on the thought I had earlier. "What, you're not going to try and convince me it was a nightmare again?" She looked around at all the destruction in the campsite. Earth was kicked up, trees had claw marks gouged out, and there were signs of blood splatter everywhere. "I didn't think I could convince you this time." I nodded as I looked around. "Yeah, I guess not." Then, I looked back at her. "You know, for a bit there, I was starting to think you were the monster eating people out here." Wendy pointed at herself, then laughed. "Wait, me? Wendy the Wendigo? Don't you think that's a little too on the nose?" I couldn't help it. As weird and messed up as everything was, as disturbing as everything I learned was, this was the Wendy I knew and cared for. So, I laughed with her. "Yeah, maybe so. Long story short, we're still together. Sure, my girlfriend might be a 7-foot tall monster that eats other monsters for fun, but everyone has their quirks. Besides, dating is hard, and I'm happy where I am. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.